Okay. All right, week 6 is in the books. We are moving forward to week 7. Today's Monday, and that means it's time to update the Uncle Lou Top 25. I hate to do it, but you love to watch it, so you can complain about it. Bang! There it is. A little something different here at the beginning. Every week when I do this, I get a handful of questions in the comments that'll say, who's close to being in, or who would your next 5 teams be? So this is in no particular order what you're seeing here, but starting with North Texas, that's the list of teams. You know, I don't know if you've ever sat down and tried to make a top 25 on your own before. Some of it sort of just falls into place easily, kind of, you just, that team goes there or whatever. For me, when it gets to teams 20 through 25, there's usually about 15 or 20 teams I'm kind of considering for those last 5 spots. So this is that sort of list of teams, starting with, that's North Texas, and going down to Penn State, North Texas, Navy, Washington, Memphis, Nebraska, Southern Cal, Mississippi State, Auburn, TCU, Utah, South Florida, Clemson, Louisville, Texas, Penn State. Now, some of these teams were in the top 25 last week and fell out. Some have never been in. Some were in a few weeks ago. A lot of these teams have 1 or 2 losses, and are close to being in my top 25 and probably everybody's top 25. But they didn't make the cut this week. But there you go. That's the other teams I was considering. All right, and now here's the regular top 25, and we'll go through it per normal. And I moved Miami to number 1. I don't have a problem with somebody who has Ohio State at 1. I wouldn't have a problem with somebody having Oregon at 1. I think there are cases to be made for all 3 teams. It kind of depends on what criteria or how you evaluate these teams. My top 25s are kind of a mixture of, okay, what has a team done, right? What's their record? How many wins do they have? How many losses do they have? Who are those wins against? Who are those losses against? And then part of it is, how good do they look? How good do I think they are? How talented are they? Do I like the coaching staff? That it's a combination of those. So it's sort of deserving versus how good are they? You know. And when it comes to Miami, the deserving part of it has put them to number 1 for me. They've got several good wins, no losses. You know, Ohio State and Oregon obviously are both really, really good teams, and I wouldn't have an issue, like I said, with anybody being ranked 1 out of those top 3 necessarily. My top 25 is not a prediction of future rankings. My top 25 is not a power rating, so it's not a prediction. So this isn't my guess on how the season is going to end. I'm not telling you by moving Miami to number 1 that I'm predicting Miami to win the Natty. I'm not telling you I'm predicting them to play Ohio State in the Natty. That's why I have them 1-2. It's not a prediction. It's what have I seen so far through 6 weeks, and how good do I think these teams are right now, today, based on what they've done, who they've played, wins, losses, who have you beat, who have you lost to, everything I just went over. So it's not a prediction. And it's not a power rating. So I don't necessarily think that Miami would beat Ohio State. That's not what this means. So if you're an Ohio State fan, you don't have to comment. You would pick Miami because people do it every week. You'd pick Miami to beat Ohio State? I don't know. I'd have to sit down and think about it. They're both really good teams. Me ranking Miami 1 and Ohio State 2 doesn't necessarily mean that, though. And there's plenty of other examples here that I could give you. Texas Tech, I've got it 7. I've been very impressed with Texas Tech. They've blown people out. They've looked dominant on both sides of the ball. They've got good lines of scrimmage, and they have good skill position players. They're well coached. They're undefeated. I've got them at 7. Would I pick them to beat Bama or Georgia or Tennessee or even Mizzou maybe? What about Texas Tech versus Notre Dame? How many of you would bet money on Tech? I don't know. So this isn't a power rating. This is, again, deserving. You know, what's your record? Who've you beat? Who'd you lose to? And how good do I think you are? I think Texas Tech is pretty good, and they're deserving of a high ranking. They're undefeated into week 7. The win at Utah, And you can see I don't have Utah ranked. That's Utah's only loss. That Utah win, I think if I was predicting future rankings, I'd have Utah in my top 20. I think Utah might be one of the best 20 teams in the country. Keyword there is I think. Haven't really seen them beat a quality opponent, and the only quality opponent they played, they got handled by Texas Tech. But I think that Utah win for Texas Tech is going to look better and better and better with each week that goes by, because I don't think Utah is going to lose very many games. And they're very close to being in my top 25 and probably will be once they win again. But that's their only loss. So I think Texas Tech is really good. But I've got Miami at 1. They, of course, went to Tallahassee and beat Florida State. The game was not nearly as close as the score indicated. It was 28-3 in the fourth quarter. And Mario Cristobal does what Mario Cristobal does in fourth quarters of games. He seemingly tries to lose. It was there's no one thing you can point to in this particular game where you go, Mario Cristobal shouldn't have done that or he shouldn't have done that. It's not a Georgia Tech situation from a few years ago where he clearly should have taken a knee with 30 seconds to go and he didn't do it and it cost him the game. It's just for whatever reason in the fourth quarter of games sometimes, Miami, Mario Cristobal, however you want to define it, seems to sort of play backwards down to their level of competition when they don't do that in the earlier parts of the game. The Notre Dame game was honestly kind of similar for Miami. They kind of controlled that game, and then in the second half, fourth quarter, they allowed Notre Dame to score 10 points and get right back in that thing. So they tend to do that, and they did that again, allowing Florida State to score some late points in that one to make it look respectable. But it's still a good win for Miami. They now have wins against Notre Dame, Florida, South Florida, and Florida State. They probably, well, there's no problem. They definitely have the most impressive resume in all of college football. There's not a team with 4 better wins than that. They have handled their business against quality competition, and they look like a legitimate contender in the ACC and poised to make a potential playoff run. I've got Miami at number 1. I've got Ohio State at 2. Not a punishment at all. In fact, Ohio State exceeded my expectations this weekend. They had a tough game last week on the road at Washington, a physical team with high-level quarterback play, and they completely shut them down. Won the game 24-6 or something like that. Then they had to come home this week and play kind of a sleepy game at home against Minnesota that not a lot of people were paying attention to, and they were a 25-point favorite, and they destroyed them. They won that game 42-3. I mean, it was over before it started, and that was a perfect sort of spot for Ohio State to come and play one of these kind of lazy, lethargic type games where you look up at the end and maybe they win like 23-10 or something. And you're like, wow, that was a little closer than I thought. They didn't do that. So this isn't a punishment for Ohio State moving them from 1 to 2. It's just a reward for the schedule Miami has played and the fact that they've ran through that without any losses now heading into week 7. Ohio State is obviously a very, very good team and a threat to win it all again this season. Oregon, I've got it 3rd. So they just moved backwards 1 for the same reason Ohio State moved backwards 1 from my previous ranking. Last week, I had Ohio State 1, Oregon 2, Miami 3. So I've just moved Miami ahead of Ohio State and Oregon. Again, it's not a punishment to Ohio State. It's not a punishment to Oregon. It's more of a reward for what Miami has accomplished through this point in the season. Oregon was on a bye week. And for anybody that thinks, because I hear a lot of people, oh, God, Penn State went and lost to UCLA. That must mean Oregon's not any good. People will come up with all kinds of weird things in their head to try to justify their preconceived notion. So if you're somebody that didn't think Oregon was going to be any good this year and you're looking for a reason to sort of prove yourself right, you're going, oh, they barely beat Penn State. And then Penn State went and lost to UCLA. That must mean Oregon's not any good. I can assure you that Oregon is some amount of good. Okay, the phrase Oregon ain't no good, you need to get that out of your vernacular. Okay, that's just not true. There are some amount of good. The question about Oregon is, how good are they? Are they good or are they great? Maybe we don't know that, and that's fair, but they are some amount of good. They're undefeated. I don't care what you think about Penn State, James Franklin, Dew Aller, their loss on the road at UCLA. That was a tough spot for Oregon last week to go into Penn State on the road at night in a whiteout with Penn State coming off of a bye week and having 8 months to prepare for that game because Penn State played 3 elementary schools to start the season. That was a tough spot for Oregon, and they won the game. Did they blow them out? No. But at the end of the season, that's not going to matter. It's a Big Ten win. It gets Oregon one step closer to the Big Ten title game and one step closer to the playoffs. Dante Moore is playing at an insane level, and Dan Lanning's got that team rolling. I've got him at number 3. But if you think they're overrated, they host Indiana this week. They host Indiana this week. And Indiana is also undefeated. They beat the life out of Illinois, and Illinois is a good team. Y'all jumped all over me last week because I left Illinois in my top 25. I had Illinois at number 9, okay? Then they got blown out by Indiana. I dropped them all the way from 9 to 25 last week. No, 24 last week. So I dropped them 15 spots to 24. Y'all jumped all over me in the comments. Well, they've won multiple games since then. Or 2 weeks ago when they lost to Indiana, it was, I guess. Y'all jumped all over me. They've won every game since then. They still just have the one loss. I still think Illinois is a good team. Indiana's just that much better, okay? This isn't anything new in college football, right? We're used to seeing a certain amount of teams at the top of college football. Some years it's 2, some years it's 6, whatever the number is, that are a lot better than other top 25 teams. The whole blowout thing that y'all talk about all the time, right? Why do y'all complain about the playoffs? Nothing but blowouts. Well, who's playing in the playoffs? All top 12 teams. And you still get blowouts. So Indiana blowing out Illinois in and of itself is not proof that Illinois is not a top 25 team. We see blowouts all the time, Illinois still just with the one loss. I've got them up now at 19. We'll get to them in a minute. But I've got Indiana at 5, very impressive. Look, I'll be honest. I've told you this. I was hoping it was a one-hit wonder last year because I don't like Curt Cignetti. Now, I can't take my dislike of Curt Cignetti and apply that in any way to my rankings. So I don't do that. I've been overly impressed with Indiana in every game they've played this year. Now, they were off this past week, but again, they play at Oregon. So whether you think Indiana is no good and overrated or whether you think Oregon is no good and overrated, you'll find out this weekend. So don't get bent out of shape about Oregon and Indiana and where they're ranked. One of them is going to be in the top 3 next week, and one of them is probably going to drop somewhere 6 to 10. So you don't have to get yourself all worked up into a tizzy about it, but I've got Indiana at number 5. I've got Oklahoma at number 6, and just like last week, this is the team in the top 10 that I feel like I know the least about, and the team that I am least confident in, I guess, of actually being one of the 10 best teams maybe. They've got an amazing defense, top 5. They might have the best defense in the SEC. They've got a great defense. There's no question. There's no doubt about it. John Mateer is a high-level quarterback. There's no doubt about that. Their run game has been lacking. They do have a win against Michigan, which is a good win at home. They have a win against Auburn, which is just, kind of it is what it is type of win. And there's the referee issue from that game. But now John Mateer is hurt. We don't know how long he's going to be out. Now, I don't punish a team simply because a player gets hurt. If a key player gets hurt and then I see that team play and they're clearly struggling without him, then yeah, then you have to reconsider. Like Florida State from 2023. They lose Jordan Travis. They go play the ACC championship game or whatever it was. They have no offense at all. You go, okay, not the same team. We don't know that yet about Oklahoma because they played Kent State this past weekend and they destroyed them because Kent State's not any good. They might be the worst team in the country, not named Oregon State. They beat Kent State 44-0. So another suffocating performance from the Oklahoma defense, and the backup Hawkins played well against Kent State. They play Texas this week. Texas lost to Florida. We all saw it. We laughed. It was hilarious. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, well, if Oklahoma is a significantly worse team without John Mateer, and he doesn't play this week against Texas, Texas is capable of winning that game, despite the fact they went on the road and lost to Florida. Previous results are not necessarily indicative of future results. We've all been watching college football for a long, long time. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois last year. Northern Illinois was not better than Notre Dame. Notre Dame made the national championship game, despite losing to Northern Illinois. I'm not saying Texas is an elite high-level team that's making the natty game. I just mean one game's results can't be extrapolated to the rest of the season. So without John Mateer, if Oklahoma struggles to run the ball, I could see a scenario where Texas has a good game and beats them. And Oklahoma has struggled to run the ball this year. They ran the ball good this past weekend against Kent State, but again, Kent State. But I'm not going to punish Oklahoma until we see how worse, or are they worse without John Mateer. So I've still got them at 6. We'll find out more this weekend when they play Texas. Texas Tech, I have given in. I'm no longer fighting the Texas Tech hype. I'm a believer. I've moved them up to number 7. Last week, I moved them way up to number 11 after having them somewhere in the 20s. They beat Utah. I moved them up into the 20s. They won again this past weekend against previously undefeated Houston, 35-11. The game wasn't close. They controlled the game. They dominated the game. They were clearly the better team the entire time. Their quarterback put up video game numbers. I think Texas Tech is the best team in the Big 12. And I can't believe I'm saying that in week 7. Because I thought we were headed for a situation in the Big 12 like we saw last year, where you get down to the last couple of weeks of the season and there's like 7 teams that can still make the Big 12 title game. And maybe that happens again. But I've watched every team in the Big 12 play at least once, and Texas Tech is the best team I've seen in the Big 12, and I don't think that can be debated at this point. There are other good teams that can give Texas Tech a game. I'm not predicting Texas Tech to go undefeated. The better team doesn't always win. Teams get better and worse over the course of a season. I get all that. But right now, headed to week 7, Texas Tech is clearly the cream of the crop in the Big 12. I've got them ranked 7th. Alabama, I've got it 8th. Now, Alabama had a good win. They didn't move up any in my rankings. I had Alabama 8 last week. It's not because I don't think beating Vandy was a good win. I do think beating Vandy was a good win for Bama. I do. They played well. Ty Simpson had another amazing game. Jam Miller, over 100 yards rushing, and Alabama's really struggled to run the ball this year. So I thought Alabama played really good. The problem is, when it comes to moving them up, Texas Tech, I jumped everybody. Again, I had Texas Tech at 11. Moved them up. There was no room for Alabama. There was nowhere for Alabama to go. Texas Tech undefeated right now with the performances I've seen, the win on the road against Utah. Now, Bama's got a great win on the road against Georgia, but their loss to Florida State is now looking worse. Not worse to the point where you got to drop them out of the top 10 or something. I still think Alabama's probably one of the best 10 teams in the country. And when they play well, they can give almost anybody a game. And so I've got them at 8 and a good win against Vandy. Georgia, I left at number 9. They blew out Kentucky, but everybody's going to blow out Kentucky, I think, this year. They won 35-14. They literally had the backups, including the backup quarterback, in the game in the third quarter. You don't see that very often in conference games in the SEC, but Kentucky is really, really bad. So Georgia did what they were supposed to do. They blew out a really bad team, 35-14. Tennessee, I left at 10. Tennessee was on a bye week this past week. They didn't play, so they didn't move anywhere in the rankings. They host Arkansas this week. Georgia is on the road at Auburn at night. Tricky spot for Georgia. We'll see how they do. Road games can be difficult. Auburn's not a great team, but weird things happen in Jordan-Hare. But Georgia should go in and win that game. Tennessee should win at home against Arkansas. Alabama has to play on the road at Missouri. I think they've got the toughest game of those 3 this week, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. Alabama does having to go on the road and play an undefeated Missouri team who you can see I've got ranked at 13 down there. They've been really impressive. Top 10 offense, top 10 defense, great quarterback, throw away from Penn State that I'm sure Penn State wishes they still had in Bo Pribula. Missouri's got what I think is the best running back in the SEC in Ahmad Hardy, and their defense has played really good. They've beat South Carolina and Kansas. Those are probably their 2 best wins. So they haven't been tested to the point that Alabama has with games against teams like Florida State, Georgia, and Vandy. But we'll find out this weekend. They host Bama. Bama absolutely destroyed them last year. I think it was 28-0 or 35-0. It was a absolute beatdown in Tuscaloosa. We'll see what happens this week. Alabama on the road at Missouri. At number 11, I've got Texas A&M. Texas A&M is the next team in the list. Yeah, I talked about Oklahoma, and I'm just kind of unsure about them. I don't really know what to make of what I'm seeing. It's kind of the same way with Texas A&M. Some of this is it's hard to get out of your mind the fact that Texas A&M goes 8-4 every year, so you're just kind of waiting on those 4 losses to come. But they've been impressive up to this point in the season. They've got a good win on the road at Notre Dame. They beat Auburn a couple of weeks ago. They won again this past weekend against Mississippi State, one of the most improved teams in the country, Mississippi State, and they just ran away with that thing in the second half. I mean, it wasn't even close. They ended up winning 31-9. suffocating defensive performance again. Spencer Reed, their quarterback, is playing at a high level. Texas A&M is a dangerous team. I've got them at number 11. Georgia Tech, I've got at 12. They're undefeated. They don't really have a good win. Now, that's not their fault. You play who's on your schedule. When they beat Clemson, it was a big win for Georgia Tech in that, that was sort of one of the next hurdles that Georgia Tech needed to get over in the ACC. They've been sort of climbing up out of the gutter the last couple of years under Brent Key after Jeff Collins just torpedoed the program. And you mark sort of goals along the way to where you want to be. And for Georgia Tech, one of those goals was to beat Clemson for obvious reasons. Clemson has been the class of the ACC for the better part of the last 15 years. Now, Clemson, as it turns out, is not very good this year. That doesn't matter in terms of what it meant to Georgia Tech to win that game, though. And they've won every game since then. Now, they got gifted a win against Wake Forest, but over the course of the season, some things are going to go your way, some things are going to go against you. Georgia Tech got lucky in that one of the things that's going to go their way this season went their way at exactly the right moment and went against Wake Forest with that blown offsides call a couple of weeks ago. They were on a bye week this past week. They host Virginia Tech this coming weekend. Virginia Tech's not a great team, but they've been playing better since firing their head coach, so we'll see how they do. Missouri, already talked about at 13. They're another one. If they win this week, where's Missouri? What's going to happen with Missouri if they beat Alabama at home? What do you think? Where will they be ranked next week? What do you think? They'll have to be in the top 10, won't they? They'll be undefeated with wins against South Carolina, wins against Kansas, wins against Alabama. They'll have to be in the top 10. So we'll find out about Missouri this weekend. LSU's another one. I've got them at 14. A lot of preseason hype, and they haven't lived up to it. The offense has been terrible. Nussmeier's been a massive disappointment. Interception problems again. The offense in general can't get out of neutral. They've got no running game at all, and now their best running back is hurt. Their defense has been really good, and I think that defense is going to keep them in almost every game they play. They lost a close one to Ole Miss. They were on a bye. This past week, and then they host South Carolina this coming weekend. Huge game for South Carolina because of the schedule they've got coming up. So I would expect a gutsy performance from South Carolina, but on the road, going to be tough for the Gamecocks to pull that off, but we'll see. LSU hosts South Carolina. Michigan, I've got at 15. Their only loss remains that road loss to Oklahoma earlier in the year. They won again this past weekend, 24-10. Justice Haynes, another 100-yard rushing day. He might be the best running back in football. Ahmad Hardy's really good at Missouri. I like Jeremiah Love at Notre Dame. But Justice Haynes is up there. Top 2 or 3 in the country in rushing. He's their best player. Bryce Underwood is getting better week to week, which you would expect from a true freshman, getting more comfortable games, starting to slow down for him a little bit maybe. Michigan's got some big games coming up, though. We'll see how he does. They play on the road at Southern Cal this coming week. And whatever you think about Southern Cal, and I had them in that list of teams that I don't have ranked, but it's close to being ranked that I showed at the beginning of the video, they can score some points. And their quarterback, that Gilligan's Island guy, Maeva or whatever his name is, he's another high-level Lincoln Riley quarterback. They can move the ball. Their weakness is obviously defense, Southern Cal, like it is every year under Lincoln Riley. Can Bryce Underwood and Michigan muster up enough offense on the road at Southern Cal to take advantage of that Southern Cal defense? We're going to find out. It's going to be a great game. That was one of the best games last year. I don't know how many people remember that because Michigan and Southern Cal both ended up being just kind of average teams last year, but that was an unbelievable game last year in Ann Arbor, and it should be a good one this coming Saturday. Michigan on the road at Southern Cal. BYU, I've moved up to 16. They just keep winning. No one talks about them. They lost their starting quarterback a month before the season because he left because of the code of conduct deal. You remember all that. And they've impressed me. I thought that would be a speed bump that would be hard for them to get over, having to replace your starting quarterback a month before the season. But they've looked good so far. They just keep winning. They did it again on the road at West Virginia. No, at home against West Virginia, 38-24. Now, West Virginia's a bad team. But, again, we're into week 7, and BYU doesn't have any losses. You have to rank them somewhere. They're undefeated. I've got them at 16. Virginia, I've got at 17. They won this past weekend, and not a lot of people thought they would do it. They were playing Louisville. Louisville was undefeated. Louisville was one of these teams in the preseason that you sort of mentioned in your 4 or 5 teams that could potentially win the ACC. And Virginia beat them at Louisville, 30-27. Great game. Came down to a field goal at the end. And Virginia, a week after getting that big home win against Florida State, avoided the letdown that a lot of people thought might have been coming this week. You see that a lot. A sort of under the radar team gets a huge home win. They storm the field. You're celebrating for 2 or 3 days instead of preparing for the next game. Virginia didn't fall for it. They showed up ready to go and beat Louisville on the road. I moved them up to 16, one spot ahead of Florida State. There are some people that are upset that Florida State is ranked and Texas and Penn State aren't, or, I'm talking about the AP poll now. The AP poll is garbage. We all know that, but it's almost become a meme now in that people every week now, the minute the AP poll comes out, they're now looking for something to complain about with the AP poll. It makes perfect sense to me to have Florida State still ranked and to have Texas and Penn State not ranked. And you can see, I agree with the AP as far as that goes. I also have Florida State ranked. I do not have Texas and Penn State ranked. Florida State still has a really good win. A really good win at home against a good Alabama team. That you can't pretend that didn't happen. You can call it a fluke if you want. You can say Alabama sleptwalked through the game. You can say Alabama didn't take them serious because they only won 2 games. Like, you say whatever you want. But the game happened. We can't pretend that it didn't. And then you move on to Florida State's 2 losses. The loss on the road at Virginia was a shocking loss when it happened. But again, Virginia is now sitting there at 5-1. They only have 1 loss. They're not a terrible team. There are no terrible 5-1 teams in week 7. I'm sorry, there's not. Can you have a schedule fluke and start out 3-0, 4-0, 3-1 and end up being terrible? Yeah. If you're 5-1 in week 7, you're not a terrible team. Are you great? Maybe not. And I'm not calling Virginia a great team. But every time Virginia wins, that loss looks better for Florida State. Every time Alabama wins, that win looks better for Florida State. So they do have 2 losses. But if you look at their schedule, they're going to be favored in almost every game they play the rest of the way. I think they're going to win more of those games than they lose. Do I think they'll run the table? No. I think they'll lose again. But I don't think they're losing 5 more times. I think they deserve to still be ranked. I've got them at 17. I've got Illinois at 18. I debated Florida State, Illinois, flip-flopping those 2 around. Florida State's got a better win. Now, they've got more losses. I know that. I know that Illinois only has the 1 loss. But, boy, they got absolutely just destroyed by Indiana. Both of Florida State's losses ended up being close. So that's where I landed with that. Florida State at 16 or 17, 18. Hey, can't count. I need to put the numbers on here, don't I? The ranks. Anyway, Florida State at 18 and Illinois right there at 19. Illinois plays Ohio State this week. So they've got a chance to make up for that Indiana debacle. They don't even need to beat Ohio State. Obviously, they'd love to do that. But, can they be competitive? Because they weren't even competitive against Indiana. That's a we'll see deal on that. Florida State hosts Pittsburgh this coming week. Pittsburgh, not a pushover. They're not a great team. Florida State should win. They're at home. They'll be favored. We'll see. They've lost 2 straight, Florida State. If they lose again, they'll have to go out of the top 25. But I've got them in there still this week. Notre Dame, I've got at 20. I don't know what to say about the Notre Dame thing. Everybody knows how I feel about it. Notre Dame's going to get to the end of the year. And even if they're 10-2, which is a big if, even if they're 10-2, their best win is going to be Southern Cal. Okay, how good do you think Southern Cal is going to be at the end of the year? How good of a win is that going to be at the end of the year? And they're going to have lost to the 2 best teams they played, Miami and Texas A&M. Now, the more Miami and Texas A&M keep winning, the better that is for Notre Dame because they can lean on the crutch of, well, we lost, but look, they're undefeated and in the top 10. They need Southern Cal to win games. They need Southern Cal to beat Michigan this weekend. They need Southern Cal to beat about everybody they play except Notre Dame. And then Notre Dame needs to beat them. They need that to be a ranked win. Notre Dame does. I don't think they should get in at the end of the year if they're 10-2 and their best win is Southern Cal. But I'm not on the playoff committee, and it's going to depend on, what happens with all of these teams ahead of them and some of the teams behind them in terms of how many losses they end up with and things like that. But I've got Notre Dame at 20. Vanderbilt, I left in my top 25. They have 1 loss, and, Alabama scored that garbage touchdown at the end. Most players would slide there and not score. And if Jam Miller slides down at the 5-yard line to end the game instead of scoring, then we're sitting here talking about Alabama beating Vandy 23-14. Pretty close. Instead, 30-14, it looks like more of a comfortable win for Bama than it actually was. This was a competitive game through the entirety of the third quarter. Remember, Vandy got down there in the red zone with a chance to take the lead. They were down 20-14 with the ball in the red zone, and Diego Poverty threw that terrible interception over the middle, and that was it for Vandy, kind of. They never really had another chance. But I thought it was a competitive game for three quarters. I left Vanderbilt ranked right there at number 20, number 20, right? 21. Arizona State, no one talking about them. They lost on the road at Mississippi State, but all they've done since then is win. They were off this past week. They've got a chance to prove themselves this coming week, though. They go on the road to Utah. Must-win game. I don't think very many people are going to talk about this game this week. Arizona State on the road at Utah. Must-win game for both teams. Utah has the loss to Texas Tech. Arizona State has the non-con loss to Mississippi State. This is a must-win game for both teams. You cannot take your second loss in the Big 12 right now. There's just too many hills to climb there if you do that. This is a huge, huge game with college football playoff and Big 12 title implications. Arizona State on the road at Utah. Going to be a great game. Let's welcome Lou and LV back to the top 25. Let's go. Let's go. I had to put a group of 5 team back in. I debated UNLV, Memphis, South Florida. I considered Navy, North Texas, Memphis, South Florida, really the other 4 I considered. James Madison is a decent team as well. I decided to go with UNLV. They just keep winning. And hey, how good does their win over UCLA look now? Wow, they absolutely destroyed UCLA. Now, I know that was a different team, different coach. I know that. But anyway, UNLV is still undefeated. They're, what are they, 5-0 now? 5-0 or 6-0? I think it's 5-0. For the first time since 1974, I've got them ranked at 23. Shout out UNLV. Cincinnati into the top 25 at number 24. You know, they played Nebraska back in week 1. And I had some amount of expectations for Nebraska this year. Didn't think they were winning the Big Ten or making the playoffs, but I thought they would be much improved over last year. And I did not have very high expectations for Cincinnati. So when Nebraska and Cincinnati played in week 1, and Nebraska won, but not very convincingly, I came away from that game going, wow, I guess Nebraska is not as good as I thought. Well, as it turns out, it looks like maybe Cincinnati is better than I thought. Nebraska, of course, won that Cincinnati game. Their only loss is a close loss to Michigan. And Cincinnati has not lost since that opening week loss to Nebraska. And this past weekend, they beat Iowa State. I know Iowa State was without some players, but we're in week 7. Everybody's without some players, okay? Because I keep hearing now, well, Iowa State was missing this guy and that guy. Cincinnati was missing players too. Everybody is missing players. It's week 7, and this is football. People get hurt. This was a good win for Cincinnati. They beat Iowa State, who was in everybody's top 15. They were undefeated. I've got Cincinnati at 24, moved Iowa State down to 25. It seemed like the right thing to do, so that's what I did. Iowa State plays this week at Colorado, so they should be able to get back on the good foot there. But there you go. That's my top 25 heading into week 7 of the 2025 college football season. I'll put up one more time the list of teams who didn't make the cut for the top 25, but I considered, there you go, there it is. Those are teams that are close to being in the top 25. Maybe they need to win another game. Maybe one of the teams in the top 25 needs to lose, but that's sort of the group of teams I considered when I sat down to do the top 25 this week, because people always ask me, where would you have Nebraska, or is Navy close to being ranked in your poll, or what about Washington? There you go. They're all pretty close. That list right there is all pretty close to being ranked. But I appreciate you watching. I hope you got your week off to a great start here on a Monday, and I'll talk to you again soon. Have a good morning.